the swamp is cleansed of its vermin, and we are making our way now back to the conventional Krat that we know and love so well. But before we can get to that, we have to go through some places we've already seen before, and things are about to start changing. I'm going to put some throwables on here, guys. The whole walkthrough I've been telling you, use the throwables. They're the most overpowered thing in the game. They're wonderful. They're such a good augment to complete your kit. And if you're wondering what the spellcaster builds like in this game are, it's throwables. That's your spellcaster build, and it's easily one of the most effective. I did an entire run of this game on stream where I used nothing but throwables, and there was only one part of it that was difficult, and it was the Door Guardian, because of course when you use throwables you can't execute him, and I ended up having to use the riposte because it was going to take so long, because his defense is like completely universal. No matter what you do to him, it does no damage, by design. It is intentionally done that way. And there's a little fade here, guys, because I got hit by this guy. And I always give this guy a really shit time, but it's not his fault. It's the guy in the Estelle Opera House. This monster is a derivative version of that one, and this one is actually fair and okay. It still has too much life. But the other one with the wheel on its back, I think that's one of the worst enemies in the game. And I didn't fight it for some pretty good reasons. Well, for some reason I always think that that one is the same, and I always go really, really heavy on it, and I feel bad afterwards because it's just not. We get some beautiful lighting here, some of my favourite lighting in the game. On those like gables and those girders or whatever they were. And then it introduces the idea of the puppets and the carcasses fighting, which infighting is something I've been fascinated with in games since Turok. And I think all games should do it because it adds a wonderful dynamic. But this is also teasing you a little bit with the idea of corruption. Everything is evolving, everything is decaying, and the puppets are no different. They're breaking down. The line between carcass and puppet is shifting. And then this sequence here is a huge gulf of decay. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to do this, guys, so I check in my inventory and I don't have that item that gives me the attribute defense. So for a moment here I thought that I was going to have to eat this, but it turns out this game is very well designed and I had just enough time to get through the decay. Just, look at that. Really close. That there, ladies and gentlemen, is good design. They could have easily made that poison me, but they didn't. And I appreciate that. And I haven't talked about the status effects, but they're horrible. This game has some of the most evil status effects you'll ever see. They went so hard with them, and it's interesting, because they did the most Dark Souls thing I can think of. They invented a bunch of status effects that you cannot use, and I don't know why. It irritates me to death that they did this. Because I'm the guy that wants to use Curse in Dark Souls 1 against the enemies, and you simply can't do that. Anyhow, Decay is a particularly nasty one. It's also the most frequent and probably the one you'll suffer against the most. Because not only is it a natural poison, but it also degrades your weapon. And at the start of Lies of P, they make an emphasis on the grinder. It is a feature that you think is going to play really heavily on moment-to-moment gameplay. And then it really doesn't, unless you're the kind of person that likes to do it. I see most people completely ignoring the grinder. They use it as just a buffing tool, and then when they get decayed you see them do it, but other than that you just don't really see it play that much of a part in many playstyles, and I don't know if that's a failing on the developers to make a compelling mechanic. Because if you get the quartz upgrade for the damage increase at perfect durability, you definitely grind a lot more then. And I was really hoping that if you had the durability grindstone that keeps you at perfect for a while, for like 40 seconds or however long it is, I was hoping if you paired those together with that upgrade on the quartz with that grindstone that you'd get really good damage, but you don't. Like, it's worse damage than literally any other buff. Because the buffs don't really convey very well what they're like, and you might think that when you buff your weapon you just get the damage over time status effect proccing and you can give them that and that's cool, but you also get a flat damage increase, it seems, because you just hit harder. And depending on the enemy, depends on how hard you hit with which specific one you choose, and there's almost no reason to go for something like that one over the traditional ones because you're losing damage. And that's the area of the game where I wish there was a bit more incentive to doing it your own way. But it simply right now doesn't seem to reward you. But you'll see decay a lot. You'll also see, is it overheat? I don't really know all the statuses that much because I don't see them all that much. But one of them, it sets you on fire, which is understandable. It might affect other things as well. I'm sure it's easy to Google and find out. Some of the bigger ones that you'll notice is one of them's called Break. Break is what the Jester puts on you. It's essentially a Lloyd's Talisman. But instead of stopping you from healing, it just reduces the efficacy of your heal. Which is huge, really, when you think about it. It's a really big one, that. Most people have 10 vials, though, so they can just heal through it. It doesn't really matter. But until you get that, it matters a lot. There aren't many enemies that do that to you, though. And there's a couple of other ones that I'm forgetting, like there's... Is it Distortion or Disruption? One of them is just straight up death. You're going to experience it in a moment when we get through this zone. It's just a status effect that is similar to Curse in Souls, where when it gets to the top, it kills the player. And you see that quite a lot. One of the final bosses has that. And it can be super dangerous against people that are used to tanking hits and have never really had to worry about what happens when you tank too many hits. So it's quite the equalizer, and it's a bit malicious really for those players because they can stand in front of most things and then that death spell just goes nope. And I suppose you can change your armor and get better defense against it because that's what DSP did. But not everybody's going to have that option. And then there are a few other ones whose names are escaping me, but the big one is there's a status effect that the Door Guardian puts on you, and it makes the stamina regen really slow. And at the moment I feel like it's busted, because usually the status effects don't affect you until you proc them. So there's a bar on the screen, when the bar gets to the top, boom, you've got a status effect, it's your fault, right? That Door Guardian smacks you, and he builds, say, half a bar, doesn't proc it, doesn't activate it, and you still receive the penalty. And the penalty's huge. That's why people don't like that boss. But these are corrupted puppets that have both the carcass and the puppeteering. And they have a different moveset, and they look slightly different too. In Lords of the Fallen, there's like 4 enemies that you fight at the very start of the game, and they're all in the final castle of the game. The whole game is like 30 bosses and 4 basic enemies. It's an absolute joke. And the reason why it feels so bad is because they don't mask it at all. They barely change them, no one has different moves. It's just like, this guy's everywhere, all the time! So you play that game and you get so exhausted by just the copy-paste enemies. There's a whole host of problems there I'm not even getting into, but it's a big one. This game does that too, but they hide it well, because they change their fucking look and they give them a new weapon or a new move. And then you go, oh wow, he's slightly different, my brain thinks he's new. But like, Lords of the Fallen's just... no. What if we gave every dual-wielded weapon one of 2 movesets? Yay! It's just bizarre. So bizarre. And it's frustrating, because they already have a mechanic in that game which is essentially recycle the same enemy from the start of the game to the end of the game, and it wasn't fun once. Can you imagine designing such a beautiful game and then filling it with a faceless zombie that has the same moveset at the start of the game as he does at the end of the game, and they can spawn him 8 deep? Can you imagine thinking that that enriches anything except the player's exhaustion and the low scores that some people have given that atrocious game? It's fucking insane. People gave Neo shit, right, for having limited enemies. When Neo's got like 25 enemies, that game's got like 6, and you see 4 of them in every fucking zone of the game. Unbelievable, dude. The fact anybody had the gall to say that about Neo. Fucking rats. Speaking of rats, putting the decay monster on this train is a particularly nasty move, because you just bounce off with this weapon because it's too wide. And I'm so stubborn I don't want to back up because I'm annoyed. And if we're going to be annoyed, we might as well talk about some annoying things, because I do think that this is the Demon Ruins of Lies of P, and we're moving towards Izalith really quick. And I mean that in quality, not in aesthetic. Sadly, Lies of P starts really strong, just like Dark Souls, and it goes real well, and then gradually it starts to go downhill, and we're currently on the decline. And you might not notice it with visuals, and you might not notice it at the time, but when you analyse it a bit further, there's definitely a... They put their foot down here, and some of the grace that we saw previously begins to evaporate. And it's going to be reflected in the walkthrough as well, because by the time we get to the Archkey Abbey, I'm not going to fight a single monster in that zone because it's fucking garbage. It is the longest level in the game, and it's the worst. It is unbearable, I would say. One of the worst final zones in the history of any Souls-inspired game. And that's a bold statement. But we're not there yet, and we're reusing assets, which is usually something people have a huge problem with. But I do think, again, that this game does it very elegantly. But what it doesn't do elegantly is imitating Dark Souls NPC design. I think I need to make a video on this, just to put it out in the world. This idea that the NPCs are anything other than horrible, horrendous, cheating garbage is quite novel to me now. And it's one of those things that really frustrates me. Because I could go and show you documents I made a decade ago talking about what I wanted from Dark Souls 2. I made like fantasy patches for what they'll do to the game and change it from the original Dark Souls, and I talked about all the things I wanted to see and I wanted to add to the series to make it what I wanted it to be. And if I were to read that now to you, you'd be terrified. Because I wanted to make Dark Souls hard. And boy, if I'd have got my wish, there'd be nobody on Reddit fucking bitching about that game, because they wouldn't have bought it. That's how bad it would have been. And at the time, I thought that that was a good idea, much like the regenerating life in this game. You might have noticed that, and I've not mentioned it because I still can't wrap my head around anybody that thinks it makes any sense. You attack enemies in this game, and for some reason that you do temporary damage, and if you don't kill them, they regenerate it. And I'm almost certain that that regeneration rate is affected by frame rate. And because I play on over 200 frames, every fucking enemy regens incredibly quickly and it looks stupid. And I have no idea why they do it. They need to get rid of it. All it means is if you are not super aggressive, you're going to be fighting a boss a lot longer than you need to. Because instead of just paying off the price of your initial purchase, you're buying it 50 times on finance. And it's fucking scummy. And I don't like it. But hey, we can rally, why can't the enemies, right? Bloodborne, this game's Bloodborne. Remember Bloodborne? Well, it don't fucking play like Bloodborne, does it? It plays like Sekiro. That's what it plays like. It plays like Sekiro if it took any skill. But the NPCs in Dark Souls used to be good. They used to be a decent level of cheaters. The kind of level of like a friend watching your screen because he wasn't as good as you, and you could still beat him because you were just mechanically better. It was that level of cheating. They could parry you if they wanted to. It was kind of predictable when they did, and you learnt not to fuck with it. And they could cheat. There is enemies in Dark Souls 1 that literally do moves that cannot be done. You know, parrying with shields that don't have parries, parrying moves that cannot be parried, all kinds of wonderful shenanigans. But this boss here, Robber Weasel, I watched a YouTuber make a tier list of the bosses in this game, and he put this as like the easiest boss in the game. It was super funny. I'd love to watch that guy fight her at level 1. Which technically can't exist because you start this game at level 10, but we won't be too pedantic. I'd just love to see that. An unleveled build, see how they did. Because that boss cheats more than any other NPC in this game. There are things that that thing can do that wind me up to a point of near suicide by clawhammer. And the sad part, for me as a player, is everything I don't like about that enemy has been around since Dark Souls 2. Literally. And it's funny because I mentioned that patch list and those requests I had for what Dark Souls could turn into if I was in control. And some of the points on that spreadsheet were really interesting when I went back and read it. Some of them were just like, Chris, you were too deep. You were too deep in the game, you were too good, and it led to making it miserable for everybody that wasn't at your level. Which is something that you should never really do if you want to have an accessible game. But sometimes it's really nice. Especially to shut up those cunts that think that they invented difficulty by platining fucking Bloodborne. Speaking of difficulty, this enemy is incredibly dangerous. This is one of the jerry cab drivers that has been corrupted by the carcass parasite, and he easily killed me more times than any monster in this area, because his moveset is particularly challenging. And because of that, I ended up going back and upgrading that hammer to try and use a different weapon. And it turns out when you fully upgrade that hammer, it's good, but it's not as good as what I'm using. And I wanted to get a bit more diversity in these videos, but it didn't end up being the way. So when I came back, I decided to clear the other side of this area. The right-hand side of this room has the Thomas Zane character. It has the eyebrow Hulk. It has some dogs. It has some conductor corrupted puppets. And at the back, it has a decay monster and some death dogs. They really went out of their way to fill this area with a lot of things. And it's kind of interesting, because you start the game in this area, you know, we've been here before, it's a familiar zone, and now it's turned into a corrupted version of itself, and a considerably more difficult version of itself, which I think is a good mechanic, and I think it's an interesting way of reusing an asset. The game does something really fun here too. It subverts your expectations, because you think you're going to go back through the area that you know very well, and you think they're just going to change everything and kind of keep you guessing. And they do that in this opening sequence, but then it deviates into a place you haven't been. And I think it's a nice bait and switch to the benefit of the player's anticipation. And you can't always say that with games, so they definitely get points for doing that one. But I was talking about the NPCs, because the NPCs are such a frustrating aspect of this Souls design that just keeps getting parroted. And I don't really know if there's a way to make them any better, because a lot of the things that they do is predicated on the fact that the players who are playing these games now have a lot of experience. And when someone has a lot of experience, they're going to end up going through the game and having a lot of success immediately, because they know the tricks and they know what's coming. They have a repository of experience with the bad situations you've put them in previously. This big carcass here, I'm really going to be showcasing the utility of the puppet string when you fully upgrade it, because it gives you a free stun. But the idea on this monster is if you can keep to his left-hand side like we did the very first version we saw, you can get around his little stabbing combo, and if it whiffs enough, he won't follow it up, and you can continue to beat him up. It'll do it here. So if you notice, he doesn't follow the combo up because it completely misses me. And because I do so much damage, we're able to just get away from him and then hit him a ton. So it just seems like a really free fight. But if you're on the other side of him, he will spin like that, which is something you really want to use to your advantage. And if you're not interested in any other of the Legion arms, you can sell the Legion plugs for a lot of ergo. And I've just finished a playthrough on stream where all I did was upgrade my HP and my capacity. I made a super tanky HP guy. And I didn't like min-max him or anything, I just went through the game as I normally do. I was much heavier than I normally am, and I had all the armour on and a lot of life, and I used the trident that you get from the Father Andreas, which is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, because of the crit stat on it. And it was kind of insane how much damage I was doing on a weapon I had no commitment to and no stat investment. It really does show how strong that tool can be. And it's going to be a very strong tool for level 10 stuff if you like it, because if you get lucky with that weapon and you're aggressive enough, you stack damage really quickly. But this is the collapsing Krat. This is the big twist here, the big revelation. And there's something really cool to be said about this. I think conceptually, the idea of the ergo busting through now and completely changing the topography of the city is one of the greatest ideas I've seen in a Souls game. But it doesn't really get developed and it doesn't really work. So one of the cool things about Lies of P is that it has this wonderful level of aesthetic that people are appreciating, and it enables them to go to a lot of different places and keep this high standard of aesthetic. However, the one criticism everybody seems to have is that the levels are a little bit too linear. They don't really give you that opportunity to explore and get lost like they would in the Souls games that inspired them. And I think that this is a very valid critique. I do like the level design, but there's no two words about it. This is a much more linear affair. However, when this section turned up, I thought this could have been the opportunity to really turn this into a bit more of a labyrinthine approach to the level. They could have taken a level that you knew, and they could have broken it and spiraled it and twisted it and made it into something a lot more complex. And it could have given it that level of confusion and navigational skill that these levels aren't really demanding of the player, but they could use the fact that you knew the area you were going through. And they could have had buildings fall down and you could use them as walkways and bridges. They could have had you break a crystal that became a formation of bridges. They could have done a lot of things that would have enabled you to link these areas. And one of my favourite tools is a simple one, which is... Watch me nearly die here because I keep getting everything I don't want. That was really close. Be very careful with those crystals, guys. They're kind of sucky. They do cause death as well. If you don't know what disruption is, if that bar gets to the top, I'm dead. Doesn't matter who you are, unless you have a lot of disruption defense, it just kills you. But in this game, they have a mechanic where when you kill an enemy, a door will magically open. And I think that that's really shit. I do. I think it's fucking lazy and I think it's dull. However, if when you killed that monster, he fell backwards and wrecked half a wall and all of a sudden opened up a path, I think that would be cool. And this game does that a little bit. For instance, there's a guy banging on the door, and then when you kill him, you know, the door does open. So I suppose you could say he's interacting with the door. But just the idea of your actions in the world having consequences, and consequences that you don't immediately see. Like, can you imagine if you were fighting with somebody in a courtyard, and when you killed them, he, like, knocked a tree down, and then the tree started slowly falling, and when it eventually landed, it busted a window that enabled you to go through. Like, just these small little interactions that elevate the simple A to B scenario. And I really think that this, with the crystals growing here, they could have done that. They could have turned this into a really vertical, really precarious and dangerous version of these levels. And I do think that this one's not too bad. And I do like fighting the corrupted big fella, as I call him. This monster is very much like the second phase of the green monster in the swamp. He has access to a lot of whips that will attack while he attacks. It takes an existing moveset and it adds this incremental damage on it, an incremental danger that you might not be aware of. And he's designed to catch you off guard with these new additions. And as long as you stay away from them, and stay behind him usually, you'll be absolutely okay. That he does have a lot of HP. His HP is higher than Gwyn in Dark Souls 1. So just think about that. I've added a little bit of a graphic on the conversation I was having previously to kind of give people an idea of the HP thresholds. It's really insane when you think about it. But this enemy here is an interesting one, because he's definitely one of the more balanced enemies, but he does have a lot of HP. The thing with him is, none of his moves are going to completely destroy you, because they all have a fairness to them that a lot of monsters don't. And you'll notice the antler carcass has his moveset. They're very similar. Of course, I don't think it has this when you first fight it, but it does later on. But he does it in a really fair cadence, whereas the monster we're about to take on uses his tools, and it does it incredibly quickly, and with an aggression that can be problematic for a lot of players. And you've heard me talk about the enemies on this game, and some of the elites being absolutely busted. The Jester is a famous one that everybody has problems with because he's really overtuned. Well, the monster coming up, I think, is worse than the Jester, and the reason people don't notice it as much is because he doesn't quite have the tools to shut down a fully leveled build. But that does not mean that when you are on a weaker build with less armor and less HP, that this thing will not just completely blitzkrieg you, because that's what it does best. It overwhelms, it hits a lot, its combos seem to never end, and before you know it, you don't have time to heal, you're being stunned, and you're probably dead. But if you come up here, there's a little hideaway that's probably related to like a cryptic puzzle or a side mission, which I've already forgotten about because I don't do them anymore. But it's guarded by a bunch of these dogs. And these dogs are interesting because, again, they use disruption. And disruption is incredibly dangerous, but it's also not too bad if you manage it correctly. When this creature spawns, it will do one of two things. It will either power up so that it can emit this death cloud, or it'll start trying to jump at you. And the jump is the most dangerous one he does, so that's the one you want to be aware of if you can, and try not to be in the face of. I did get whomped by a death dog, sadly, but thanks to the shortcut here, you can get back really quickly if you want to get your ergo. And at this moment in time, I definitely want to get my ergo, because I'm trying to see just how busted we can make our character. And if you're ever wondering what I'm putting points into, guys, I'm putting points into technique and capacity. I want capacity to the point where I can wear 2 boss amulets. And I think that usually involves getting it to about 30 to 35 if you're going to be wearing my outfit, which has no defense items whatsoever. And then technique is going to be going as high as we can make it, which usually goes to about 55, and then when I wear one of the rings that gives you an extra technique, we might be able to get it up to 60. If you do the side quests and you get the ring that also gives you technique and motivity, you can get it a little bit higher. But I've already touched on this, and I'll continue to mock it, because it just doesn't really reward you. And you have that much strength, but you're only... I say that strength, that much technique, but you're only getting 1 extra damage stat each time you level. And it's just not enough. And it's not like the developers didn't know that you could give them good returns. Like, I'm all for a soft cap and a hard cap, but the hard cap usually is when it stops going up at all, isn't it? That's how we kind of calculate that. That's when it becomes completely pointless to do it, because the laws of diminished returns have got too strong. And that should only happen to me when you're up in, like, maybe the 80s or the 90s or something. It should be the complete end of the peak. This is the guy, by the way. So the strategy is very important. Stun him with 2 hits, then roll, and get down here as fast as you can. If he attacks like this, he'll start attacking this board, and then you can hit him through the geometry. Wait for him to swing, and then attack him as he swings. And if you do so correctly, you will hit the tip of his fingers, and he will die. And that looks really easy, doesn't it? Trust me, guys, it's not. I had more trouble with that monster than some of the bosses in this game on my first run. He killed me easily 10 to 20 times because I died from almost anything he did. And he's just incredibly beefy, incredibly dangerous. And then I stumbled on that ability to get him stuck, and if you get him stuck, he's a lot more vulnerable. There is a second method to get him stuck, which I found on stream the other day, which involves going where he came from and getting him stuck on a corner, and if you move to the side, you can just throw items at him so you don't even have to swing or be in danger at all. And that is really safe until it's not. Because I was messing around with him, and then I went into my inventory to swap some stuff, and when I came out, it was beating me up. And I don't know what he did because we didn't get a chance to see him, but there's 2 particular ways to get rid of that problem, and it's a big problem. And then that leads us into the apartments with the Gunner Alchemist, and a new enemy here, who is another alchemist who has the same weakness as the wrestling alchemist from a long time ago in the Grand Exhibition, which is these guys have this technology on their back, and when you strike it, it leads to a staggerable state and a flinch. They get stunned. And then if you bank in your charged R2, you can then piece them up. I like this enemy in principle. I think it's really, really cool, but I just think that it's a bit too beefy considering. And, you know, they're designed around you getting a free, cheap, and easy stun. But if you don't, they are very beefy, and they take a lot of hits, and then this one's a particularly dangerous moment, because while you're killing this guy, a second version of these Cain enemies is going to come down the staircase where I'm looking, and he's going to charge you, he's going to stab, and then he's going to spin. After he spin, you're going to whack his capsule, and then you're going to punish him and kill him. And I'm going to make this look really easy, but it doesn't mean that it is. Especially these monsters. These monsters, they have range, they have damage, they have speed, they have health, they have defense, they have everything. They are incredibly lethal, and they are rather clearly inspired by a certain member of the church at a certain part of another video game that we will not mention. Starts with a B. You guys all got that. You saw it, I'm sure. I know I did. I've been through the Cathedral Ward enough times to spot men who have somehow forgotten their big heart. But when you come around here, there's another enemy. He's known as a fire breather. I don't know any of the real names, guys. I'm just giving them names because the game doesn't seem to have a bestiary. And I have looked online to see if I can find anything official from the devs, like a press kit or, you know, some kind of renders, and it probably exists somewhere, but I haven't managed to find it. But if you kill this guy and you drop down, there are some tools. I didn't want to do a plunge attack there because I didn't know if it was going to hurt me. That's one of the biggest inconveniences when you're trying not to take damage in a sequence. It's all the small things you don't think about. But continue moving forward, and we're going to be moving into an area where we have to fight my least favourite boss in the game. And it might not be the one that you expect, or it might not be the one that you think is bad. But I do not like the Walker of Illusions. I think it's just one of those fights that's meant to be a bit of popcorn, it's meant to be a little bit of a middle ground before you fight something more important. And it can be very problematic and annoying for players if they come in there and they don't know what they're doing, or they have a particularly uncomplimentary build. And this creature it's just an aggressive creature with a knife. It covers a lot of range, it has big combos, but it has the ability to cancel into a complete, like, is it 180 swing? Like, this thing spins around 90 degrees on a whim while you're recovering and just stabs you. Like, she can spin crazy amounts, it's insane. And it leads to never knowing whether or not you're safe. And here it is right now. So the strategy is going to be stay behind it at all times. And I'm going to give you some little tips to be careful of. So most of her moves you can walk to the side of. But her red move is an interesting one. Because when she does the red move at the end of the string, if you're attacking from behind while she's swinging to get damage right here, if she does the red move, sometimes she'll be able to curve it into you. And you'll be in the face of taking massive damage. And then this right here is her splitting up. So she can turn into a clone of herself. And if you do it correctly, like I did just then, you can kill them on spawn. And again, this looks so easy, but it's not. It really isn't. Like, this fight is genuinely very annoying. And you'll notice I'm only hitting her once. The reason I'm only hitting her once is because right now, at any moment, she can cheat me by doing that bullshit fucking 90-degree stab. And then she's dead, and it looks like anybody could do that. But if you find yourself struggling there, we've all struggled there. It's a very annoying and nuisance of an enemy.